The mouth, small seed, one giant step for justice. They say one person can't change the world, that it takes power, status, or permission to make a difference. But I wasn't born with power. I didn't carry fame in my pocket or stand behind a podium when I made my choice. I was just a woman on a long day, carrying years of quiet exhaustion, and yet, in one still moment, one small seat, I chose not to move. Not because I thought it would change everything, but because something in me said, this is enough. That quiet choice, made without fanfare, became the first step in something far greater than me. People think history is written by the loudest voices, but I learned that sometimes it's written in silence, in courage, in staying where you are, because moving would mean leaving behind your dignity. This isn't just my story. It's a reminder that ordinary people in ordinary moments can become the spark the world has been waiting for. I want you to understand something simple but powerful. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to raise your voice, wave your hands, or make a scene to create change. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is to simply say no. That's all I did. I didn't stand up to make a speech. I didn't call for attention. I didn't expect to be remembered. I just sat still. I sat because it was the right thing to do. I sat because I was tired. Not tired from work, but tired of giving in. Tired of watching dignity stripped away from people day after day as if they had no worth. Tired of pretending that it was normal. It wasn't. You see, in that moment, I wasn't trying to start a movement. I was just trying to be treated like a person, just like anyone else on that bus. I wasn't angry in the way you might think. I was calm. I was clear, and I was done accepting a system that told me I was less than someone else. When you live with injustice long enough, you start to feel it in your bones. It's not just about a law or a seat. It's about what that law says about your humanity. It's about what that seat says about your place in the world. And I knew I had the same right to rest my feet as anyone else. But let me tell you something. What seems like a small act in the moment, what feels personal and simple, can ripple out far beyond what you expect. That one seat wasn't just a seat. It was a line in the sand. And I knew when I crossed it, something would change, not just for me, but for others too. We often think we have to wait for the perfect moment, the perfect plan, the perfect leader. But sometimes change begins the moment we decide we can't wait any longer. Sometimes it begins when we stop asking for permission to be treated like human beings. What I did that day wasn't heroic in the way people sometimes describe it. It was necessary. It was overdue. I wasn't thinking about the headlines. I wasn't thinking about history. I was thinking about what was right and what was wrong. And when I looked around, I saw too many people afraid to take a stand. So I took a seat. I want you to know that the world doesn't change only when the loudest voices speak up. It changes when the quiet ones stop complying, when we stop cooperating with the things that are hurting us, when we stop pretending we're okay with being told we don't matter. That kind of resistance. It doesn't always look like fire and fury. Sometimes it looks like stillness. It looks like calm. It looks like peace that refuses to move until it is acknowledged. And let me say this. Every one of us will be given a moment, whether we know it or not, where we'll be asked to choose. Maybe not on a bus, maybe not in front of others, but somewhere in your life, you will be given a choice to either accept what is unjust or stand your ground. And the world may not notice it right away. There might be no applause, no cameras, no crowd, but your soul will know. Your heart will know. And what you do in that moment could be the spark that lights a fire someone else needs to see. So don't wait to be special to do something special. Don't wait for someone to tell you your voice matters. It already does, even if it trembles, even if it's quiet, even if it's tired. There is strength in your stillness. There is meaning in your resistance. And you don't need to move mountains to move people. Sometimes you just need to sit still and refuse to be moved. Because the world has always been changed by people who decided that enough was enough. And when we decide that our dignity isn't up for debate, when we act from that place of quiet certainty, we do more than protest. We inspire. We show others what's possible. We open the door for them to walk through, and before long, that one quiet act becomes the first step in a giant movement toward justice. And that's why I stayed in that seat, not because I wanted to start something, but because I couldn't keep participating in something that was so wrong. And that was the moment everything began to change. People often ask what kind of person it takes to make history. They imagine someone with power, someone born into privilege, someone trained and prepared to lead. But I wasn't any of those things. I didn't come from fame. I didn't wear a title. I didn't have a crowd following me or cameras waiting to record what I would do. I was just a woman living my life, going to work, trying to make it through the day like anyone else. There was nothing extraordinary about me, except that I believed I deserved to be treated with dignity. And when the moment came, I decided not to step aside from that belief. You don't have to be anyone special to make a difference. That's the lie the world tells us, that real change is reserved for the powerful, the famous, or the wealthy. But I'm here to tell you that history has always been moved forward by ordinary people, people with regular lives, regular struggles, regular fears, who chose to do something that wasn't so regular, people who didn't wait to be invited into greatness, but simply responded to the injustice with truth. That's all I did. I was a seamstress. I worked long days and lived with the same exhaustion, the same frustration, the same limits so many others lived with. I knew what it was like to be overlooked, to be disrespected, to be pushed to the side. But I also knew that just because I didn't have status didn't mean I didn't have worth. And that belief, that quiet truth, was enough to carry me in that moment when I chose not to stand. We wait too often for someone else to take the first step. We look around hoping the right leader will show up, but what we miss is that we are the ones we're waiting for. Change doesn't need permission, it needs participation. It needs people who are willing to show up, not with fanfare or perfection, but with courage. And courage is something we all carry inside us, whether we recognize it or not. The world teaches us to underestimate ourselves. It tells us that unless we're in charge or in the spotlight, we don't matter. But some of the most powerful acts in history came from people who never thought they would be remembered. People who acted out of principle, not popularity. And that's what makes their actions so powerful. They weren't done for praise. They were done because it was the right thing to do. I didn't need a microphone or a podium to take a stand. I just needed to believe that I had the right to exist in a world that often tried to tell me I didn't. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to fight. I just needed to stop giving in to the idea that I was less. And that simple decision not to give up my seat became the start of something much bigger than I ever imagined. You have that same ability within you. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be willing to say this isn't right, willing to act even if your voice shakes, willing to be seen even when it's uncomfortable, willing to take that one small step that may just inspire others to follow. Never let the world convince you that you're too small to matter. Never believe the lie that your contribution is too little, because when enough ordinary people decide to do the right thing, the extraordinary becomes possible. Movements are built from moments, from actions that at first feel quiet, even invisible. But they grow, they spread, they remind others that they are not alone. I wasn't looking to become a symbol. I wasn't trying to change the world. I was just trying to hold on to my dignity. But that one act, that one choice became a spark. And others saw it, they felt it, and they knew they could act too. That's how change works. It doesn't begin in noise or power. It begins in truth and in the hands of those who are willing to carry it forward. So don't ever doubt yourself. Don't wait for a sign that you're ready. You are ready when your heart tells you that enough is enough. You are ready when you realize that staying silent is no longer an option. You are ready when you choose to believe that your voice, your choices, your presence, all of it matters. You don't have to be extraordinary to do something that matters. You just have to be willing to stand firm in what's right. And when you do, others will see, they will follow, and the world will begin to shift. One quiet act people often think courage means being fearless, that to be brave you have to be strong and unshaken, bold and unbothered. But that's not the kind of courage I knew. The truth is, I was afraid. My heart was beating fast, and I knew exactly what could happen. I knew the risk, and I felt the weight of it. But courage doesn't mean the fear disappears. It means you move forward anyway. You breathe through the fear, you steady your hands, and you hold on to what's right. That's what I did. I didn't act because I wasn't afraid. I acted because I was tired of letting fear decide for me. There had been so many times before when I stayed quiet, when I moved, when I gave in to avoid trouble. You learn to do that when the world tells you your peace depends on your silence. You learn to keep your head down, to not draw attention. But there comes a moment when that kind of peace no longer feels like peace. It feels like surrender. It feels like losing a little more of yourself every time you pretend something is okay just to stay safe. That day I wasn't willing to lose any more of myself. I knew I could be arrested. I knew I could be hurt. But I also knew that standing up by sitting down was the only way to reclaim something the world had tried to take from me: my voice, my dignity, my right to exist on equal ground. And if I had to face fear to do it, I was willing, not because I felt powerful, but because I had lived too long feeling powerless. Fear is a part of living under injustice. It walks beside you everywhere you go. It rides the bus with you. It waits in line with you. It follows you home, and after a while it starts whispering that maybe this is just the way things are, that maybe you can't change it, that maybe you should just accept it. But I refuse to believe that. I refuse to believe that fear was more powerful than my right to be treated like a human being. That kind of refusal doesn't come from anger. It comes from clarity. It comes from knowing who you are and what you deserve. And when you know those things, fear may still be there, but it no longer controls you. You learn how to walk with it without letting it lead. You learn how to speak with it trembling in your throat. You learn how to hold your ground even when your knees shake. Some people are waiting to feel fearless before they act. They want the nerves to disappear, the doubt to vanish, the risk to feel smaller. But if you wait for fear to leave, you may never move, because fear doesn't always leave. You just get stronger than it. You don't let it hold the final word. You don't let it stop your truth. I wasn't fearless, but I was grounded. I was rooted in something deeper than fear, something that had grown inside me after years of seeing wrong passed off as normal. I had seen people humiliated, families separated, children denied simple respect, all because of a system that tried to make some of us feel less human than others. And that injustice had worn me down, but it also had built something up inside me. a quiet strength that waited for the moment to rise. And when that moment came, I didn't need to feel brave. I just needed to trust that standing still in truth was worth more than staying comfortable in fear. And once I made that choice, something shifted inside me. I stopped trying to avoid discomfort and started leaning into purpose. I stopped asking if I'd get in trouble and started asking if I could live with myself if I didn't act. The fear didn't disappear, but it lost its grip on me. And that's what I want others to understand. You don't have to be fearless to do something meaningful. You just have to decide that your values are stronger than your fear. You have to decide that your dignity is worth protecting, even when it's risky. You have to decide that justice is worth a little trouble, a little noise, a little resistance. That day I decided, and I've never regretted. Because fear may visit you, but it doesn't have to live in you. It doesn't get to make your choices. It doesn't get to define your worth. And when you choose courage, even trembling courage, you show the world that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits quietly and says, I will not move. And that's exactly what I did. For a long time, people had been whispering. Quiet conversations behind closed doors, hushed voices filled with frustration and fatigue. There were so many moments when people looked at each other and nodded, silently agreeing that things weren't right. But silence, no matter how heavy or honest, doesn't move the world. Silence may protect you for a moment, but over time it protects the very thing you want to change. I understood that deeply. And on that day, I decided I could no longer be part of that silence. I had been quiet for too long. I had watched too many people go along just to get by, not because they didn't care, but because they were tired, because they were afraid, because they had seen what happens when someone speaks up. That fear was real, but what we didn't always talk about was the cost of staying silent, the way it wears on your spirit, the way it eats away at your pride. Every time I moved when I was told to move, every time I kept my head down while someone else was mistreated, a small part of me went with it, until one day I realized I had nothing left to give to that silence. The thing about injustice is that it knows how to hide behind silence. It thrives when we convince ourselves that speaking out won't matter. It feeds on our decision to stay quiet just one more time. And the more we accept it, the more normal it begins to feel. But wrong doesn't become right just because people get used to it. And I couldn't keep getting used to it. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when every part of me knew it wasn't. There's a kind of quiet that brings peace, and then there's the kind of quiet that comes from being silenced. I had lived with the second one. I had been taught to obey, to comply, to survive. But survival isn't the same as living. It's not the same as standing in your full humanity. It's not the same as knowing your worth and refusing to let it be diminished one more time. That was the choice I had to make. I could either keep surviving in silence, or I could take a risk and speak. Not with words, but with my action. People forget that even a quiet act can break the silence. Even something as simple as refusing to move sends a message. That day, I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice, but my stillness spoke volumes. It said, I see what's happening, and I won't be part of it anymore. It said, I'm not less than anyone else. It said, this system may expect me to comply, but today I choose to resist. That message echoed far beyond that bus. And it didn't come from shouting. It came from a refusal to be silent one more time. We often wait for big moments, for the perfect opportunity to make a difference. But injustice doesn't wait. It keeps going until someone interrupts it. And sometimes the only way to interrupt it is to stop cooperating. That's what I did. I stopped cooperating with a lie that said some people deserve more than others. A lie that said silence was the price of safety. A lie that said I didn't matter. I refused to keep feeding that lie with my silence. I know it can be hard. I know it's scary. Speaking up, even in small ways, can bring consequences, but so can silence. Silence can leave us feeling powerless. It can make us feel invisible. It can convince us that our pain isn't worth naming. But your voice matters, your dignity matters, and when you speak up, however you choose to, you let others know they are not alone. You remind them that the silence isn't unbreakable. You never know who's watching. You never know who needs to see you take that step so they can find their own courage. That's how movements begin. One person breaks the silence, and others begin to raise their voices. One person says, this isn't right, and others realize they've felt the same way all along. It spreads, it builds, it grows stronger, but it has to start somewhere. And sometimes it starts in a moment when the easiest thing to do is stay quiet and you choose not to. That day I chose not to. I chose to let my actions speak. I chose to let the silence break. And once it did, there was no turning back. And that's exactly what I did. When I made that decision not to move, I didn't know what would come next. I didn't have a vision of crowds marching in the streets. I didn't imagine speeches being given or history books being written. I wasn't thinking about what it would spark. I was thinking about the moment right in front of me. I was thinking about how it felt to be told again that I was less than someone else. I was thinking about the weight of years spent giving in, being pushed aside, and living in a world that expected me to accept it all without question. But what I did that day, what seemed so small at the time, ended up becoming something far greater than I could have planned. That's what happens when a single act of truth finds its way into the hearts of others. It spreads, it grows, and it becomes movement. I've always believed that change doesn't start with crowds. It starts with one person deciding that they can't accept the way things are anymore. It starts with one action, one moment of courage, and then that act touches someone else. Maybe it gives them strength. Maybe it gives them clarity. Maybe it simply helps them realize they're not alone. But whatever it does, it moves them to act too. And just like that, what began with one step becomes a walk, then a march, then a movement. But that's the power of one choice, one stand, one seat. That bus boycott didn't start because people were told to protest. It started because people saw something in themselves through my refusal. They saw their own quiet exhaustion. They saw their own frustrations. And they saw the possibility of change if they stood together. My choice reminded them that we didn't have to accept things as they were. That we could take action, not through violence, not through hate, but through unity and determination. So they walked for days, for weeks, for over a year. They walked in the cold, in the rain, in the heat, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. And that's what people often miss. Movements aren't built overnight. They aren't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes they begin in silence. Sometimes they begin in a single gesture that simply says no more. That's what I said when I stayed in that seat, and others heard it even if I didn't speak the words out loud. They heard it in the stillness. They heard it in the courage. And because they heard it, they answered with their own kind of resistance. You never truly know how far your actions will go. You never know who's watching or who's waiting for a sign that it's time to move. You may think you're alone, but you're not. There are always others quietly struggling, quietly wishing for a way forward. And when you take a stand, no matter how small it feels, it gives others permission to do the same. That's what happened after that day. People didn't rise up just because of me. They rose up because something inside them had been waiting. and my act gave it a reason to rise. That's the beauty of movement. It doesn't need to start with a crowd. It starts with conscience, and it builds when people begin to see their values reflected in the actions of others. That shared sense of dignity, that shared desire for justice. It becomes the foundation for change, and it's built one person at a time. That's how the bus boycott grew. Not through orders or instruction, but through a shared decision that we were worth more than what the world was giving us. And even though it started with a single moment, it didn't stop there. It moved forward. It spread to courtrooms, to churches, to cities. It moved through conversations and through silence. It took hold of people's hearts and reminded them that justice was not just a dream, but a responsibility, a duty, a possibility. You don't have to wait for everyone to be ready. You don't have to wait for the perfect conditions or the loudest support. All it takes is someone to act with purpose, and when that purpose is rooted in truth, others will find their way to it, just like they did then, just like they always will. One action can lead to many. One stand can become a movement, and it doesn't have to begin with a speech or a crowd. It can begin with a quiet choice in an ordinary moment. And that's exactly what I did. That seat on the bus, it might have looked ordinary to someone else, just a place to rest, a spot like any other. But to me, it came to mean so much more. It wasn't about the seat itself. It was about what it represented. That seat stood for something bigger than one moment or one person. It became a symbol of every time someone had been told to move, to wait, to accept less than what they deserved. That seat became the place where dignity took root, where resistance took form, where something long buried stood tall again. When I chose to stay there, I wasn't trying to make a statement others would talk about. I was just tired of being told that I didn't matter. I was tired of rules that told me I belonged in the back, not just of the bus, but of life. And when I stayed in that seat, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just about my legs being tired. It was about my spirit being done. Done moving for injustice, done stepping aside for hate, done cooperating with a system that fed on silence and fear. But what surprised me most wasn't the action itself. It was how far that single act traveled. That simple moment, that refusal to get up, turned into something people could hold on to. It became a symbol that reminded others of their own worth, their own voice, their own strength. And that's the part that still humbles me, that something so small, so personal, could give other people the courage to speak, to act, to stand in their own way, in their own time. It wasn't about becoming a hero. It wasn't about being remembered. It was about not letting anyone else define what I was worth. And when people saw that, they didn't just see me, they saw themselves. They saw their mothers and fathers, their neighbors, their children. They saw every time they had been told to move, when they knew they had every right to stay. That seat became a mirror, and in it, people saw truth. Truth has a way of opening doors. That moment on the bus opened a door not just for me, but for so many others. It created space for people to ask, what am I accepting? What have I been told to believe about myself? And when people begin to ask those questions, change follows. That's the power of a symbol. It holds a meaning that words alone can't always carry. People began to see that justice isn't something we wait to be given, it's something we claim. And sometimes we claim it not with a fight, not with noise, but with stillness and certainty. That seat, that small act, reminded people that resistance doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it looks like calm. Sometimes it looks like someone simply refusing to be moved. Over time, that image, the image of a woman who stayed seated while others expected her to move, took on a life of its own. It traveled across cities, through stories, into classrooms and churches and homes. It spoke to people who never met me, who never even stepped on a bus like that, but they understood what it meant. They understood that moment because they had lived their own versions of it. And that's how symbols work. They speak across time and space. They connect us. They remind us that we are not alone in the fight for dignity. That's what made that seat powerful, not because it was made of steel or wood, but because it held the weight of every voice that had been silenced. It became a place where one voice quietly said, "I deserve better," and 1,000 more found the strength to echo it. Even now, that seat means something. Even now, it carries more than just the memory of that day. It carries the message that every single one of us can make a difference. That courage doesn't wait for permission. That resistance doesn't need an invitation. That dignity, once claimed, can become a light for others. What I want people to understand is that they too have their seat. It may not look like mine. It may not be on a bus. It might be at a job, in a classroom, at a dinner table, or in the quiet of their own heart. But there will come a moment where the world tells you to move, tells you to accept less, to be quiet, to stay in your place. And in that moment, you will have a choice. You can step aside, or you can sit firmly in who you are and let your presence speak for itself. That seed taught me that we don't need to shout to be heard. We don't need to fight to be seen. Sometimes we just need to stop moving for what is wrong and make space for what is right. And that's exactly what I did. If this message stirred something in you, if it reminded you of your worth, your voice, or your quiet strength, then don't let it stop here. Share it, speak it, stand by it. Let your own aha moments of courage inspire someone else to take theirs. Like, comment, and share this message with someone who needs a reminder that one quiet act can change everything. And if you believe in dignity, justice, and the power of ordinary people, subscribe and stay with us as we continue walking forward, one step at a time, toward a world we all deserve.